This is not a video that I had planned to make, but you know when you're half in the bag and suddenly remember something you said back in a different life? Well, there is a good chance that there will be a Guild Wars video in that season. Not sure which one it'll be. It won't be the first one that gets released, I know that. What could I possibly say about Guild Wars 2? To start, I played it on YouTube for almost 4 years, and let me tell you, it was impressive how few people actually watched it. It was the first MMORPG that I ever put any serious time into, and it might be the game that has captured my interest for the single longest stretch of time, period. I mean, I had no real reason to play the game practically ad nauseum like many other content creators and influencers do. I just did it because I enjoyed playing the game for that long. I've always had something of a weird relationship with MMOs. I think I've always felt like I should like them more than I typically have. I like fantasy settings, large-scale questing, and other people. Sometimes, and I've tried nearly every game on the market at one point or another, and none of them have ever actually managed to capture my interest for any significant stretch of time. It's not like I have any issue putting time into a game. I would be mildly embarrassed to admit how much of my life I've spent playing Skyrim, the Infinity Engine games, or if I really went back in time, Pokemon. I bought this game on release, and yes, for newcomers, Guild Wars 2 was not always free to play. Spent probably somewhere around 10 to 15 hours playing it, and then promptly never thought about it again. Now, I am a lot of things, ugly, insufferable, and on several government watch lists, but most of all, I am the cheapest motherfucker you've never met. So cheap that I realized the $60 I spent on the game was being effectively wasted, and I decided that I would force myself to get my money's worth, damn it. I had originally planned to play the game for 50 episodes or so. Seemed like a nice number, could say I gave it a ride, and that would be that. Then, after the story stuff, I noticed that there was some exploration that I could do. Then, some expansion pack content came out. And between all this, there were exclusive holiday events, and then I found PvP, and I love this game. In a lot of ways, it's almost in a sense that I can't describe. I like to think that everyone has that piece of media that just sort of connects with them on an intrinsic level, and this game is certainly that for me. What I really think it is that makes this game so enjoyable lies in the multitude of different ways that it can command your attention, with its fast-paced, fluid combat, story elements, beautiful locales, or any number of other endeavors. There is a tangible feeling to the fact that the game is structured in a way as to constantly engage with the player. Take the combat systems, for example. All the combat is carried out in entirely real time. And what I mean by that, for those that might be a bit confused, is that you're hardly ever going to be standing around waiting for a spell to finish channeling in this game. It's much more likely that you're going to have to use the game's dodge mechanic to roll your ass out of the way of an attack from an enemy. You're never stationary. You can move around with effective impunity, and oftentimes your attacks interact with the skills of an enemy, meaning that you've got to pick and choose where you're going to burn your cooldowns. These systems force you to pay attention and be engaged, because if you're not going to be killing much of anything. I mean, look, you can see what's going on here. You want to go back and watch some of the videos where I play PvP? It sounds like I'm writing a goddamn essay the night before it's due. Holy moly. This might seem like a bit of a weird comparison, but I actually think this game's combat is pretty similar to that of a Tales game. Sure, it takes place in the open world as opposed to a separate battle screen, but the premise of every involved character basically having the freedom to do whatever they choose at any time is definitely similar. And like a Tales game, the combat is kept fresh by the flurry of different skills and abilities that the player can outfit their character with. There are 9 different classes for the player to choose from, and each of those classes can use a wide selection of weapons and train in different skills, as well as having specific specializations that really slot a character into a more fine-tuned archetype. For instance, I played a daredevil thief, which granted my character the unique ability to use staves and a few other acrobatic skills. You could also outfit a thief as you might think one would be more traditionally played, with deception and subterfuge. Or you could opt for the opposite and specialize as a sharpshooter, which turns your character into a long-range sniper wielding a rifle. And you can switch between all of these whenever you like. Maybe you're heading into PvP, or think the situation calls for something different, or just get plain tired of whatever it is you're doing. Nothing's stopping you from changing it up. I messed around with multiple different playstyles over the years, and while a Daredevil Thief might just be a worse warrior because of the way I play, it is the loadout that I find works for me, and I'm sure there will be one that works for you. There's also a surprising amount of depth here, with abilities able to be chained together to create combos. But most importantly, considering this stuff can be a little daunting, the combat is tons of fun no matter what level you're at. I enjoyed running through enemies both when I knew absolutely nothing and when I knew far more than I ever thought I would care to. And I know a lot of what I've shown on screen is the PvP content, but that's primarily just to show how much of a high-octane frenzy this stuff can turn into. The PvE combat is just as fun, and maybe even more so when one considers that you often get to partake in giant group events. This is an unabashedly good time, and I would argue that it's some of the best combat you're going to find in an MMO. There are other games that try to do similar styled combat, but at least in my opinion, they try so hard to be cool that they don't focus on making sure it's enjoyable. And how about the world where you get to do all this? Guild Wars takes place in Tyria, as well as a few surrounding areas, which takes the player to an assortment of locations throughout their travels. Sheer scope is not an uncommon aspect of MMOs, you could even consider it one of the genre's selling points. But my goodness, Tyria is massive. It was massive before they started adding new areas for the expansion content. Much of the landscape is split into clear and identifiable sections that center around the 5 different races that inhabit the world. The Nordic-inspired Norn reside in the frigid north, the war-based Char live on what literally used to be battlefields, the tech geniuses that are the Asura live in an area that, over the years, has been turned into a giant haven for science, the humanoid plants of the Sylvari live, well, in the forest, and the humans are basically in the middle of everything in a boring city because they're boring humans. The way that the areas manage to feel unique in comparison to each other goes beyond just the physical appearances of them. The NPCs that make up these areas are wildly different from each other, with individual interests and motivations. Some are just trying to survive, while others are in search of adventure or knowledge. The areas very much feel as if they were crafted around the characters that roam them. Ascalon, where the Char reside, is not a very fun place to be, which becomes entirely unsurprising when one learns that the Char are a very cynical, splintered race, not only when dealing with other races, particularly humans, but even amongst themselves. Conversely, the Grove, the hub city of the much more familial, understanding, maybe even a tad naive Sylvari, is peaceful and inviting. The player is presented with plenty of opportunity to experience these locations, both in the physical manifestation of them and the more nuanced cultural realities that shaped them. Speaking of the physical manifestation of these areas, this game is gorgeous. Sprawling vistas, whether they be plains, mountains, forest, or seas, are everywhere the player looks. I'm not a typically introspective person, but I cannot tell you how many times this game's visuals just forced me to stop and admire what was in front of me. Best of all, the player is actively encouraged to, and rewarded for, exploring these areas. Every location is littered with an abundance of different points of interest, scenic sites, and completable events that award the player with experience, items, money, and achievement progress, among other things. It's a very simple system, but I'll be damned if it doesn't work. Nothing sets off dopamine like getting experience for walking, or riding on any number of incredibly cool mounts if you've purchased the expansion content. Part of what it is that I think really tickles me is the realization of how much I got out of this game, in spite of how much I didn't do over the time I played. There are God knows how many achievements I never earned, puzzles I never solved, or dungeons I never explored. I never once over the course of nearly 4 years, participated in a raid event, which is the literal foundation of MMO gameplay for a lot of people. I just never thought that I would be able to make a video and participate in a raid at the same time. Also, I've got a lot of friends that are much more tuned to MMOs than I am, and I've heard the voice comms during raids. Some of you people are terrifying. I was still able to spend as much time in Tyria as I did, and I can confidently say that I enjoyed every second of it. Outside of the jumping puzzles that would pop up on occasion. Didn't enjoy those. And playing against Guardians and Necromancers every game in PvP will start to, destroy your sanity. But other than those two things, I enjoyed it all, I promise. Now, as this video starts to wind down, one question you might be asking yourself is why I've yet to mention anything about the game's narrative. The reason for this is twofold. This video is already fairly long, and I have so much that I would like to say about the story that I don't think it's suited for this video. The story is a constant presence throughout the entire experience that probably deserves its own deep dive in its own video. I also don't want to potentially spoil anything for anyone that might have come to this video seeking to learn a little bit more about the game. One aspect that I will make a very clear statement on is that of the community. I don't think I've ever had a bad experience with anyone in connection to this game, both in and outside of it. The community is phenomenal. I strongly encourage anyone with the interest to check out the game's subreddit. It's a very welcoming, kind community that makes you happy to be a part of. All of this came together to create a game that I couldn't get enough of. It single-handedly changed my expectations for MMOs. I implore anyone that might have an interest in this game to refrain from making the mistake I did. I was too dismissive and too quick to label it as just another MMO. There is something in Guild Wars 2, no matter where it is in Tyria, for everyone. Whether it be the story and PvE content, exploration, or PvP game modes, there is bound to be something here that interests you. I'm almost willing to swear by it. And with the recent drop of new content, I think it might be time to make a return myself. I hope you'll join me, regardless of if you'll be embarking on your first journey or revisiting an old friend.